A young woman steps off the stagecoach in a remote logging town, carrying nothing but a worn carpetbag and a secret that will either destroy her chance at happiness or lead her to discover a love more extraordinary than she ever imagined. When Clara Thompson plucks a violet from the roadside and eats it like candy, the horrified gasps of onlookers seal her fate as the town outcast. But sometimes what appears to be madness is actually wisdom, and what looks like a curse might be the very gift that changes everything. This is the story of a woman whose unusual hunger would either starve her soul or feed the greatest romance of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The Oregon Territory spring of 1883 painted Willowbrook in shades of emerald and gold, with wildflowers carpeting the hills like nature's own welcome mat. Clara Thompson pressed her face to the stagecoach window, drinking in the sight of towering Douglas firs and the snow-capped Cascade peaks beyond. After 3 weeks of travel from the dust and desperation of Colorado, this verdant paradise seemed too beautiful to be real. At 24, Clara carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned early that survival required both strength and grace. Her auburn hair, though travel-weary, caught the afternoon light streaming through the coach windows, and her green eyes held depths that spoke of both loss and resilience. The other passengers had kept their distance during the journey, unnerved by her habit of nibbling on flower petals she collected during rest stops. If only they understood that those delicate blooms had been her salvation during the hungry months. After grandmother Rosalind's passing, the carpetbag at her feet contained everything she owned in the world: 2 changes of clothing, her grandmother's leather-bound journal filled with botanical wisdom, a small collection of pressed flowers, and the stack of letters that had brought her west. Robert Caldwell's correspondence had painted him as a prosperous lumber mill owner seeking a refined Eastern bride to grace his established home. His descriptions of Willowbrook as a thriving community surrounded by natural beauty had stirred something hopeful in Clara's weary heart. What Robert didn't know, what Clara hadn't dared reveal in her carefully worded responses, was that her refinement came not from finishing schools or society parlors, but from a childhood spent learning the secrets of mountain plants from a woman the townsfolk had called a witch. Grandmother Rosalind had taught Clara that nature provided everything necessary for survival if one knew how to look, how to taste, how to trust the wisdom passed down through generations of women who understood that flowers held more than beauty. The stagecoach lurched to a halt outside Brennan's General Store, jolting Clara from her reverie. Through the dusty window, she glimpsed a bustling main street lined with wooden buildings, their fresh-cut lumber gleaming in the afternoon sun. Men in work clothes moved with purpose between the mill and various shops, while women in practical dresses navigated the wooden sidewalks with baskets and parcels. This was a working town, Clara realized, built on industry rather than agriculture, where the rhythm of life followed the sound of saws and the whistle of the lumber mill. Willowbrook, final stop, called the driver, a grizzled man whose weathered face had grown familiar over the long journey. He climbed down to assist his passengers, offering Clara a calloused hand as she gathered her skirts to descend. The moment her boots touched the ground, she felt a strange sense of homecoming, as if the earth itself welcomed her presence. But there was no time to savor the feeling. According to their correspondence, Robert Caldwell would be waiting to meet her, ready to escort her to his home where they would have time to become properly acquainted before their wedding next month. Clara smoothed her traveling dress, a deep blue wool that had seen better days but remained respectable, and adjusted the simple hat that had protected her complexion during the dusty journey. As she stood beside the coach while the driver retrieved her trunk, Clara's gaze was drawn to a cluster of wild violets growing along the building's foundation. Without thinking, she knelt and plucked several of the purple blooms, their sweet fragrance rising to greet her. The petals dissolved on her tongue like nature's candy, their delicate flavor, carrying hints of honey and green growth that reminded her of spring mornings in the Colorado mountains. A sharp intake of breath made her look up to find a well-dressed woman staring at her in horror. The woman's elaborate burgundy dress and perfectly arranged hair marked her as someone of status in the community, but her expression held nothing but disgust. "Dear Lord," the woman whispered loudly enough for nearby shoppers to hear, "she's eating flowers like some kind of animal." Clara rose gracefully, brushing dirt from her skirts as more people turned to stare. She recognized the look in their eyes, the same mixture of fascination and revulsion she had encountered in Colorado, when people discovered her unusual dietary habits. Most folks didn't understand that flowers could be food, medicine, even sustenance during difficult times. "Mrs. Clara Thompson?" A deep voice cut through the growing murmur of the crowd. Clara turned to see a tall, imposing man approaching with long strides. His well-tailored suit and confident bearing immediately identified him as someone accustomed to respect and deference. This had to be Robert Caldwell, though his appearance differed slightly from her expectations. His dark hair showed more silver at the temples than his letters had suggested, and his brown eyes held a hardness that hadn't come through in his written words. "Mr. Caldwell," Clara replied with a warm smile, extending her hand in greeting. "I'm so pleased to finally meet you. Your descriptions of Willowbrook didn't do justice to its beauty." Robert's gaze fixed not on her face but on the violet petals, still visible at the corners of her mouth. His expression shifted from welcomes to confusion to something approaching alarm. "What exactly were you doing just now?" "Enjoying nature's bounty," Clara answered simply, wiping the remaining petals from her lips. "Wild violets are quite delicious with a lovely sweet flavor. They're also excellent for maintaining good health during travel." The well-dressed woman who had first noticed Clara's behavior stepped closer, and Clara realized this must be Robert's sister Margaret, whose existence had been mentioned briefly in his letters. Where Robert showed confusion, Margaret displayed open hostility. "Robert," Margaret said in a stage whisper that carried clearly to the gathered onlookers, "surely you don't intend to proceed with this arrangement. The woman eats weeds like livestock." Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but she maintained her composure. "I beg your pardon, but violets are hardly weeds. They're edible flowers with both nutritional and medicinal properties. My grandmother taught me to recognize and utilize dozens of beneficial plants." "Your grandmother taught you to behave like a savage," Margaret snapped, her voice rising. "What respectable woman consumes flowers plucked from the roadside? It's absolutely disgusting." A crowd had gathered now, drawn by the unusual spectacle of the mail-order bride who ate flowers. Clara heard whispers rippling through the assembly. Unnatural, peculiar, what kind of upbringing? The faces surrounding her ranged from curious to concerned to openly judgmental, but none showed understanding or acceptance. Robert Caldwell stood frozen between embarrassment and indecision, clearly wrestling with how to handle this unexpected development. Finally, he stepped closer to Clara, lowering his voice but not enough to prevent others from overhearing. "Miss Thompson, I fear there has been some misunderstanding about the nature of our arrangement. Your letters gave no indication of such unusual habits. A woman in my position requires a wife whose behavior reflects well on my standing in the community." Clara felt the familiar sting of rejection, though this time it cut deeper because she had traveled so far and risked so much on the promise of acceptance. "Mr. Caldwell, surely you don't judge a person's character based on a single moment of harmless behavior. I assure you that my knowledge of plants comes from legitimate education, not wild impulses." Margaret Caldwell laughed, a sharp sound that carried across the street. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Education? What sort of education teaches a lady to graze like a cow?" "Robert, you cannot seriously consider proceeding with this farce. What will people say?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Clara watched Robert's face close off as he made his decision. In that moment, she saw clearly that he valued appearance over substance, conformity over character. The man she had hoped to marry cared more about his reputation than about understanding her or giving her a chance to explain. "I'm afraid this arrangement cannot proceed," Robert announced, his voice carrying with the authority of someone accustomed to having his pronouncements accepted without question. "I'll provide funds for lodging tonight, but you'll need to make alternative arrangements for your future." The rejection hit Clara like a physical blow, though she refused to let the pain show on her face. Around her, the crowd murmured with satisfaction at this dramatic conclusion to the afternoon's entertainment. Some showed pity, others smugness, but none offered support or understanding. "I see," Clara said quietly, dignity intact despite her crumbling prospects. "I thank you for your honesty, Mr. Caldwell, though I regret the misunderstanding that brought us to this point." She turned to collect her trunk from where the stagecoach driver had set it, her mind already racing ahead to consider her limited options. The return journey to Colorado would cost money she didn't have, and even if she could afford it, there was nothing waiting for her there but debts and painful memories. "Now hold on just a minute." A clear, confident voice cut through the crowd's murmur. Clara looked up to see a woman approaching with determined strides, her practical gray dress and no-nonsense demeanor marking her as someone accustomed to taking charge of difficult situations. The woman appeared to be in her 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pinned in a simple bun and kind eyes that held both warmth and steel. "Grace Morrison," the woman introduced herself, extending a work-roughened hand to Clara. "I run the boarding house down on Maple Street. Couldn't help but overhear this conversation, and I've got something to say about it." She turned to face Robert and Margaret Caldwell, her expression shifting from welcoming to challenging. "Robert Caldwell, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. This young lady has traveled clear across the country based on your invitation, and you're going to cast her aside because she ate a flower? Have you lost all sense of decency?" Robert's face reddened at the public criticism. "Mrs. Morrison, with respect, you don't understand the situation. A man in my position cannot afford to associate with someone whose behavior is so irregular." "Irregular?" Grace's voice rose with indignation. "The only irregular thing I see here is a grown man who judges a person's worth based on what she chooses to eat. My late husband fought in the war alongside men who survived on grass and tree bark when supplies ran low. You think eating a violet makes someone unfit for society?" Margaret Caldwell stepped forward, her face tight with anger. "Mrs. Morrison, surely you don't defend this woman's bizarre behavior. It's unnatural and unseemly for any lady to conduct herself in such a manner." "What's unnatural," Grace replied calmly, "is the amount of energy you're spending condemning a harmless action. The girl ate a flower, not poison. She showed knowledge of plants, not madness. Maybe if more folks around here understood what nature provides, we'd all be better off." Clara felt a surge of gratitude toward this unexpected defender, though she also recognized that Grace Morrison's support might come at a social cost. Small communities rarely forgave those who challenged established hierarchies, especially when prominent families like the Caldwells were involved. "Mrs. Morrison," Clara said softly, "I appreciate your kindness, but I don't wish to cause trouble for you. Mr. Caldwell has made his position clear, and I must respect his decision." Grace studied Clara's face, taking in the quiet dignity and gracious response to public humiliation. "Child, you're not causing trouble for anyone. You're just showing more class than some folks who think they own it." Her pointed look at Margaret Caldwell left no doubt about her meaning. The crowd began to disperse as the immediate drama concluded, though Clara noticed many lingering conversations and backward glances. By evening, she knew the entire town would know about the mail-order bride who ate flowers and was rejected at first sight. The prospect of facing that scrutiny indefinitely made her stomach clench with anxiety. "Come along," Grace said decisively, gesturing toward Clara's trunk. "Tom," she called to a young man emerging from the blacksmith shop across the street. "Come help with this lady's belongings." Tom Morrison proved to be a pleasant-faced man in his 20s, with his mother's kind eyes and the powerful build that came from working with hammer and anvil. He approached with a curious but respectful expression, tipping his hat to Clara before hefting her trunk with ease. "Ma," he said quietly, "you sure about this? The Caldwells won't take kindly to you harboring someone they've rejected." Grace's jaw set stubbornly. "The Caldwells don't dictate who I house in my own establishment, Thomas Morrison. This young lady needs shelter and decent treatment, and she get both at our place." As they walked toward the boarding house, Clara found herself grateful beyond words for Grace Morrison's intervention, even as she worried about the complications her presence might create. The town she had hoped would welcome her as Robert Caldwell's bride now knew her as the strange woman who ate flowers, and that reputation would be difficult to overcome. The boarding house on Maple Street proved to be a large, well-maintained, two-story structure with a wraparound porch and flower gardens that immediately caught Clara's attention. Even in her distressed state, she couldn't help but notice the variety of plants growing in carefully tended beds: roses, lavender, calendula, and several herbs she recognized from her grandmother's teachings. "Beautiful gardens," Clara commented, as they climbed the front steps. "You have quite a collection of useful plants." Grace paused, her hand on the door handle. "Useful how?" "Well, the calendula is excellent for healing cuts and burns, and that chamomile will make wonderful tea for settling upset stomachs. The lavender helps with sleep troubles, and those nasturtiums are delicious in salads." For the first time since the disastrous meeting with Robert Caldwell, Clara saw genuine interest instead of judgment in someone's eyes. Grace studied her face intently, as if reassessing her earlier impressions. "You know about plants for healing?" Grace asked. "My grandmother taught me," Clara explained. She understood that nature provides remedies for most ailments, if you know where to look and how to prepare them properly. Tom Morrison set down the trunk and looked at his mother with raised eyebrows. "Ma, remember what Doc Foster was saying about meeting someone who understands herb medicine? She's been asking around town for months." Grace's expression brightened considerably. "Dr. Helen Foster runs our medical practice here in Willowbrook. She's been looking for someone with knowledge of natural remedies to help with her patients. Most folks around here think plant medicine is just old wives' tales." Hope stirred in Clara's chest for the first time since stepping off the stagecoach. Perhaps her unusual knowledge, which had made her an outcast in Robert Caldwell's eyes, might actually prove valuable to someone else. Perhaps rejection by one narrow-minded man didn't mean rejection by an entire community. "I'd be honored to meet Dr. Foster," Clara said carefully, not wanting to seem too eager or desperate, despite feeling both. "Though I should mention that I have no formal medical training, only what my grandmother taught me about plants and their properties." "Formal training isn't everything," Grace replied briskly, opening the boarding house door. "Dr. Foster will be more interested in what you know than where you learned it. She's progressive that way, not bound by conventional thinking like some folks." The interior of the boarding house was as welcoming as its exterior, with polished wood floors, comfortable furniture, and the lingering sense of baking bread and fresh flowers. Clara felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as Grace led her upstairs to a small but cheerful room overlooking the back garden. "This will be your room for as long as you need it," Grace announced, setting Clara's carpetbag on the simple wooden dresser. "We'll discuss payment arrangements later after you've had time to get settled and figure out your next steps." Clara's throat tightened with emotion at this unexpected kindness from a virtual stranger. "Mrs. Morrison, I can't adequately express my gratitude." After what happened today, I wasn't sure anyone in Willowbrook would be willing to help me." Grace waved away the thanks with a practical gesture. "People like the Caldwells make a lot of noise, but they don't speak for everyone in this town. There are plenty of folks here who judge others by their actions, not their eating habits." After Grace left her to settle in, Clara sat on the narrow bed and finally allowed herself to fully process the day's events. The future she had planned lay in ruins, but perhaps that wasn't entirely a tragedy. Robert Caldwell had revealed himself to be exactly the kind of man she had hoped to avoid. Judgmental, concerned with appearances above substance, unwilling to see beyond surface differences to the person beneath. She moved to the window and looked out at Grace's garden, where the last light of evening painted the flowers in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow she would have to begin building a new life from nothing, but tonight she was safe and warm, surrounded by the scent of growing things that reminded her of her grandmother's wisdom. Perhaps eating those violets had been exactly the right thing to do after all. They had revealed Robert Caldwell's true character before she made the mistake of marrying him, and they had somehow led her to Grace Morrison, who saw her knowledge as valuable rather than shameful. In the language of flowers that her grandmother had taught her, violets symbolized faithfulness and humility. Maybe those qualities would serve her better in this new place than the artificial refinement Robert Caldwell had expected. As Clara unpacked her few belongings, she found herself thinking not about what she had lost, but about what might still be possible. Willowbrook was full of growing things, and where plants flourished, her knowledge would always have value. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but it might also bring new opportunities. And perhaps, if she was very fortunate, it might even bring understanding from someone who could appreciate the wisdom that grew wild in mountain meadows and roadside patches of earth. Dawn broke over Willowbrook with the melodic chorus of birds and the distant whistle of the lumber mill signaling another day of industry. Clara woke in her small room at Morrison's boarding house, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings before the events of yesterday came flooding back. The rejection, the humiliation, the unexpected kindness of Grace Morrison all felt like scenes from someone else's life rather than her own reality. She dressed quickly in her second-best dress, a forest green cotton that complemented her auburn hair, and made her way downstairs to find Grace already bustling about the kitchen. The older woman looked up with a warm smile that immediately dispelled any lingering awkwardness about accepting charity from a stranger. "Good morning, dear. Coffee's fresh, and there are biscuits in the oven. Hope you slept well despite all the excitement yesterday." Clara accepted the offered coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that helped clear the last cobwebs of sleep from her mind. "Very well, thank you. Better than I have in weeks, actually. There's something about this place that feels peaceful." Grace nodded approvingly as she pulled golden biscuits from the oven. "Tom always said this house has good bones. Built it myself after my husband passed. Wanted something that would welcome folks rather than just shelter them." The front door opened to admit Tom Morrison, his work clothes already dusty from an early start at the blacksmith shop. He greeted Clara with the same respectful courtesy he had shown the previous evening, accepting coffee and biscuits from his mother with obvious appreciation. "Ma, I stopped by Doc Foster's place on my way to the shop," he said between bites. Told her about our guest and her plant knowledge. "She's mighty interested in meeting you, Miss Thompson. Said she could come by this morning if you're agreeable." Clara's pulse quickened with nervous anticipation. Meeting Dr. Foster represented her best hope for establishing herself in Willowbrook, but it also carried the risk of another rejection if her unconventional knowledge failed to impress. "I would be honored to meet her. Should I prepare anything specific?" "Just be yourself," Grace advised. "Helen Foster is nothing like the Caldwells. She cares about results, not appearances." As if summoned by their conversation, a firm knock at the front door announced a visitor. Grace opened it to reveal a woman in her early 30s with intelligent, dark eyes and prematurely gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. Her simple blue dress and medical bag immediately identified her as the town physician, but Clara was struck by the quiet confidence in her bearing and the genuine warmth of her smile. "Dr. Foster," Grace welcomed. "Please come in." "Clara, May. I present Dr. Helen Foster." "Helen, this is Clara Thompson, the young lady Tom mentioned." Dr. Foster extended her hand with the directness Clara was learning to associate with Western women. "Miss Thompson, I'm delighted to meet you. Tom tells me you have knowledge of medicinal plants. That's a rare and valuable skill in these parts." "My grandmother taught me what she could," Clara replied modestly. "Though I have no formal medical training, I understand the properties and preparations of many native plants." Dr. Foster's eyes lit with genuine interest. "Native plants are often our most effective remedies, though many of my colleagues dismiss them as primitive superstition. Would you mind if I asked you a few questions about your knowledge?" They settled in Grace's comfortable parlor, where Dr. Foster began what felt more like a consultation between colleagues than an examination of credentials. She described various ailments she encountered in her practice, asking Clara about potential plant-based treatments. Clara found herself relaxing as she explained the uses of willow bark for pain relief, echinacea for boosting the body's defenses, and chamomile for both digestive troubles and anxiety. "Remarkable," Dr. Foster murmured after Clara had detailed the preparation of a tincture for respiratory ailments. "Your understanding of dosages and contraindications is more sophisticated than many trained physicians. Where did your grandmother acquire such knowledge?" Clara chose her words carefully, aware that her grandmother's reputation as a healer had sometimes bordered on accusations of witchcraft. "She learned from her mother and grandmother before her, a tradition passed down through generations of women who served as healers in isolated mountain communities. They had to rely on what nature provided, so they developed extensive knowledge of local plants." Dr. Foster nodded thoughtfully. "The indigenous peoples of this region have similar traditions. Their healers possess knowledge that could revolutionize medical practice if we were humble enough to learn from them." This progressive attitude surprised Clara, who had expected skepticism or condescension from a formally educated physician. "You don't find such methods primitive or unreliable. On the contrary, I find them based on centuries of careful observation and experimentation. Modern medicine has much to learn from traditional healing practices." Dr. Foster leaned forward with growing enthusiasm. "Miss Thompson, I wonder if you might consider assisting me in my practice. I've been searching for someone who could help me develop effective plant-based treatments for common ailments." The offer struck Clara like lightning, both thrilling and terrifying in its implications. "Dr. Foster, I'm honored by your confidence, but I must be honest about my circumstances. Yesterday's events made it clear that my unusual knowledge is viewed with suspicion by many in this community." Dr. Foster's expression hardened slightly. "You mean the ridiculous scene with Robert Caldwell over eating violets? I heard about that nonsense. Violets are not only edible but nutritious, containing more vitamin C than citrus fruits. Your knowledge of their properties demonstrates exactly the kind of understanding I need in an assistant." Grace Morrison had been listening quietly from her rocking chair, but now she spoke up with evident satisfaction. "I told you Helen would see sense where others see strangeness. The position I'm offering," Dr. Foster continued, "would involve studying the medicinal plants native to this region, helping me prepare remedies, and eventually assisting with patients who might benefit from natural treatments. The work would be challenging but rewarding, and it would provide both income and accommodation." Clara's mind raced with the possibilities and implications. "Accommodation? I have a small cottage behind my clinic that's been empty since my previous assistant moved east to marry. It has a garden that would be perfect for growing medicinal plants, and it's close enough to the clinic for convenience, but private enough for your own life. The offer seemed too perfect to be real, like a gift from the same providence that had led her to Grace Morrison's kindness. Yet Clara had learned to be cautious about opportunities that appeared too good to be true. "Dr. Foster, I appreciate your offer more than I can express, but I feel obligated to mention that my presence might cause controversy. If yesterday's reaction is any indication, some people will object to my involvement in medical practice." Dr. Foster's smile turned slightly fierce. "Miss Thompson, I've been practicing medicine in frontier communities for 8 years. I've faced objections to everything from my gender to my methods to my fees. Opposition from narrow-minded individuals is simply part of pioneering new approaches to healing." Tom Morrison set down his coffee cup with a decisive clink. "If you'll pardon my saying so, Miss Thompson, seems to me you've got 2 choices. You can let yesterday's foolishness define your future, or you can show this town what you're really made of." His mother nodded approvingly. "Thomas is right. You've got knowledge that could help people, and Dr. Foster needs someone with your abilities. Don't let the Caldwell's small-mindedness rob the community of what you have to offer." Clara felt a surge of determination rising. Within her, pushed by the memory of her grandmother's teachings and pulled by the promise of meaningful work. "Dr. Foster, if you're willing to take the risk of employing someone with my unconventional background, then I'm willing to accept your offer." "Excellent," Dr. Foster replied with evident satisfaction. "When can you start?" "Immediately, if you need me." Dr. Foster rose from her chair with the brisk efficiency Clara was learning to associate with her. "Perfect. Let me show you the cottage and introduce you to the clinic. We can discuss specifics of your duties as we go." The cottage behind Dr. Foster's clinic proved to be a charming single-room structure with large windows that filled the space with morning light. A small kitchen area occupied one corner, while a comfortable bed and simple furnishings provided everything necessary for independent living. But it was the garden that truly captured Clara's imagination. The previous tenants started this garden, but never had time to properly develop it. Dr. Foster explained as they walked among raised beds that showed evidence of careful planning but recent neglect. "There are already established herb sections here, and here, with room for expansion." Clara knelt to examine the existing plants, her trained eye quickly identifying sage, rosemary, thyme, and several other culinary and medicinal herbs. "This has wonderful potential. With proper care and some additions, it could provide a substantial portion of the remedies needed for common ailments." "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Dr. Foster led her toward the clinic, a modest but well-equipped building that served the medical needs of Willowbrook and the surrounding logging camps. Inside, Clara found examining rooms, a small surgical area, and an impressive collection of medical texts and equipment. "My practice serves everyone from mill workers to loggers to farming families," Dr. Foster explained. "The most common ailments are injuries from dangerous work, respiratory problems from sawdust and harsh weather, digestive troubles from poor diet during long work seasons, and the usual array of women's health concerns." Clara nodded, already mentally cataloging plants that could address each category of problem. Many of those conditions respond well to natural treatments, either alone or in combination with conventional medicine. "Precisely my thinking. Your role would be to help me develop and prepare such treatments, maintain the medicinal garden, and assist with patients when appropriate." They spent the morning touring the clinic and discussing Clara's background in more detail. Dr. Foster's questions revealed both her medical expertise and her genuine respect for traditional healing knowledge. By midday, Clara felt more optimistic about her future than she had since leaving Colorado. The sound of approaching horses drew their attention to the front windows, where they saw a wagon pulling up outside the clinic. A weather-beaten man in logging clothes helped a pale woman down from the wagon seat, supporting her carefully as she walked toward the clinic door. "Mrs. Patterson," Dr. Foster said as they entered. "How are you feeling today?" The woman managed a weak smile. Not much better, I'm afraid. The nausea is getting worse, and I can barely keep food down. Dr. Foster guided her to an examining room while the man, presumably her husband, waited anxiously in the main area. Clara found herself following, uncertain of her role but drawn by professional curiosity. After a brief examination, Dr. Foster emerged to speak with Mr. Patterson. Your wife is suffering from severe morning sickness. It's common in early pregnancy, but can become dangerous if she can't maintain proper nutrition. Is there anything you can do? Patterson asked desperately. She's lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and she's so weak she can barely get out of bed. Dr. Foster glanced at Clara with a questioning look. Actually, there might be something. Miss Thompson, do you know of any natural remedies for severe nausea during pregnancy? Clara felt a moment of panic at being consulted in her first hour of employment, but her grandmother's teachings came flooding back. Ginger root is very effective for nausea, especially when prepared as a mild tea. Peppermint can also help, and red raspberry leaf strengthens the system during pregnancy. Do we have any of those available? Dr. Foster asked. I noticed wild mint growing along the creek behind the clinic, and there might be ginger at the general store. Red raspberry grows wild in this region, though I'd need to identify the exact locations. Dr. Foster made her decision quickly. Mr. Patterson, I'm going to prepare some natural remedies that should help your wife's condition. Miss Thompson will gather the necessary plants and prepare them properly. Clara spent the afternoon collecting mint leaves, purchasing dried ginger from Brennan's store, and locating a patch of red raspberry canes in a sunny clearing near town. Under Dr. Foster's supervision, she prepared a blend of teas designed to ease Mrs. Patterson's nausea while providing gentle nutrition. When they delivered the remedies to the Patterson home that evening, Mrs. Patterson was able to keep down her first full meal in days. The grateful tears in her husband's eyes as he thanked them made Clara realize she had found something more valuable than employment. She had found purpose. Walking back through town in the gathering dusk, Clara noticed several people watching them with curious but respectful expressions. Word of her successful treatment had apparently spread, creating a different kind of attention than yesterday's scandal. That was excellent work today, Dr. Foster said as they reached the clinic. You have an intuitive understanding of how to combine plants for maximum benefit. My grandmother always said that plants work together like notes in a song. The key is finding the right harmony. Dr. Foster paused at the clinic door, studying Clara with thoughtful eyes. I have a feeling you're going to revolutionize medical care in this region, Miss Thompson. Your knowledge could help hundreds of people who've been suffering unnecessarily. As Clara settled into her cottage that night, surrounded by the scents of her newly tended garden and the sounds of a town gradually accepting her presence, she reflected on the remarkable transformation of her circumstances. 24 hours ago she had been a rejected mail-order bride with no prospects and no place to belong. Tonight she was a valued assistant to a respected physician, with meaningful work and a home of her own. The violets she had eaten yesterday, which had caused such scandal and rejection, had actually been a gift in disguise. They had revealed Robert Caldwell's true character, led her to Grace Morrison's kindness, and ultimately brought her to work that utilized her most precious skills. Perhaps her grandmother had been right when she said that nature always provided what was needed, even when the path seemed uncertain. Outside her window, the garden rustled softly in the evening breeze, and Clara could almost hear her grandmother's voice whispering approval through the leaves. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to serve others through the ancient wisdom of growing things. Tonight, she was exactly where she belonged. 3 weeks had passed since Clara Thompson began working alongside Dr. Helen Foster, and the rhythms of her new life had settled into patterns as natural as the growth cycles of her medicinal garden. Each morning brought her to the cottage window to check on the herbs and flowers she was cultivating, their progress a daily reminder of how much could change with proper care and attention. The garden had become her pride and joy, expanded from its original modest borders to include sections dedicated to different types of healing plants. Calendula bloomed bright orange in one corner, while purple echinacea stood tall beside delicate chamomile flowers. She had transplanted wild mint from the creek and established patches of plantain and yarrow gathered from meadows beyond town. Most challenging had been convincing ginger plants to grow in Oregon's climate, but her careful attention to soil preparation and protection from harsh winds was beginning to show success. Dr. Foster had proved to be everything Clara could have hoped for in an employer and mentor. The physician treated her as a colleague rather than a subordinate, often seeking her opinion on complex cases and encouraging her to develop new treatment approaches. Their working relationship had evolved into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect and shared dedication to healing. This particular morning found Clara in the clinic's preparation room, carefully measuring dried herbs into small paper packets for patients to take home. Mrs. Patterson had recovered completely from her pregnancy nausea and was now recommending Clara's herbal treatments to other expectant mothers. Word of successful healing had spread through the community with surprising speed, bringing a steady stream of patients seeking natural remedies for various ailments. The bell above the clinic door chimed, and Clara looked up to see a man she didn't recognize entering the waiting area. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that showed premature silver at the temples, and clothes that spoke of education rather than manual labor. His face was deeply tanned from outdoor work, but his hands were clean and uncalloused, suggesting intellectual rather than physical pursuits. Most intriguingly, he carried what appeared to be a collection satchel, the kind used by naturalists and botanists for gathering specimens. "Good morning," he said to Dr. Foster, who had emerged from her office to greet him. "I'm looking for someone who might be able to help me with plant identification. I understand there's a woman here who has extensive knowledge of local flora." Clara felt a flutter of nervous excitement. Few people in Willowbrook showed genuine interest in botanical knowledge for its own sake. Most only cared about plants when they needed healing. "That would be my colleague, Miss Clara Thompson," Dr. Foster replied. "Clara, this gentleman is interested in your botanical expertise." Clara stepped forward, wiping her hands on her apron before extending one in greeting. "Clara Thompson. How may I assist you?" "William Hayes," he replied, taking her hand briefly. His grip was firm and warm, his eyes a striking blue that reminded her of mountain lakes. "I'm conducting botanical research in this region, studying the medicinal and nutritional properties of native plants. I've heard remarkable things about your knowledge and wondered if you might be willing to share some insights." The request was so unexpected and delightful that Clara had to suppress a smile of pure pleasure. "I'd be happy to help, however. I can, Mr. Hayes. What specifically are you researching?" William's face lit with enthusiasm that immediately marked him as a fellow plant lover. "I'm documenting the traditional uses of Pacific Northwest flora, particularly plants that indigenous peoples and early settlers used for food and medicine. My goal is to create a comprehensive guide that could help people recognize and utilize the natural resources available to them." Clara's interest sharpened considerably. This was exactly the kind of work her grandmother had always dreamed of seeing, the formal documentation of plant wisdom that had been passed down through generations of healers. "That sounds like incredibly important work. There's so much knowledge that exists only in oral tradition, and it's in danger of being lost as older generations pass away." "Exactly my concern," William agreed. "I've been traveling throughout the territory, interviewing elderly residents and tribal elders, but I've been told you have unusually extensive knowledge for someone so young." "Dr. Foster interjected with obvious pride in her colleague. "Miss Thompson has identified and successfully utilized dozens of local plants for medicinal purposes. Her treatments have helped numerous patients in ways that conventional medicine couldn't." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks at the praise. My grandmother was an exceptional teacher. I'm simply applying what she passed down to me. Would you be willing to show me some of the plants you work with? William asked. I have sketches and pressed specimens, but I'd love to see living examples and learn about their preparation and usage. Clara glanced at Dr. Foster, who nodded encouragingly. I don't have any urgent appointments this morning. Why don't you show Mr. Hayes your garden and the areas where you collect wild specimens? The tour of Clara's garden proved to be a revelation for both of them. William's knowledge of botanical classification and scientific names perfectly complemented Clara's understanding of practical applications and traditional uses. As they walked among the raised beds, comparing notes and sharing observations, Clara felt an intellectual excitement she hadn't experienced since her grandmother's death. This is remarkable, William said, examining the carefully organized sections of healing plants. You've created what amounts to a living pharmacy, with everything arranged according to therapeutic properties rather than botanical families. It seemed the most practical approach, Clara explained. Dr. Foster and I can quickly locate what we need for specific conditions, and it's easier to remember which plants work well together when they're growing in proximity. William pulled a leather notebook from his jacket and began sketching the garden layout. Do you mind if I document this arrangement? It's a perfect example of how traditional knowledge can be applied in systematic ways. Clara watched him work, noting the careful attention he paid to detail and the obvious respect he showed for her organizational methods. Most people, including some patients, still viewed her garden as slightly eccentric, but William saw it as a legitimate scientific endeavor. Mr. Hayes, she said as he finished his sketching, may I ask about your background? Your approach seems more scientific than most plant enthusiasts I've encountered. William's expression shifted slightly, taking on a guarded quality that hadn't been there before. I was formerly a professor of botany at a university back east. I came west to continue my research in a less restrictive environment. The careful phrasing suggested there was more to the story, but Clara didn't press for details. She understood what it meant to leave behind a life that no longer fit and start over in unfamiliar territory. Would you like to see some of the wild collection areas? She offered. There are several meadows and forest clearings within walking distance that have excellent specimens. They spent the morning ranging through the countryside around Willowbrook, with Clara pointing out useful plants and William adding them to his ever-growing collection. She showed him where the best willow bark could be harvested for pain relief, identified several varieties of edible flowers, including the violets that had caused such controversy, and explained the traditional methods for preparing each type of remedy. William proved to be an excellent companion for such expeditions, knowledgeable enough to ask intelligent questions, but humble enough to defer to her practical experience. His enthusiasm for botanical discovery matched her own, and their conversations flowed easily from scientific classification to traditional folklore to personal experiences with plant healing. This has been incredibly valuable, William said as they returned to town in the early afternoon. I've learned more about practical plant applications in one morning than I did in months of academic research. The pleasure was entirely mutual. Clara replied sincerely, It's wonderful to meet someone who shares a genuine appreciation for botanical knowledge. As they approached the clinic, Clara noticed a small crowd gathered outside, their voices carrying an undercurrent of agitation. That immediately put her on alert. Margaret Caldwell stood at the center of the group, her face flushed with righteous indignation as she gestured emphatically toward the clinic building. There she is, Margaret announced loudly as Clara and William came into view. The woman who's been filling people's heads with dangerous nonsense about eating weeds and flowers. Clara felt her stomach clench with familiar anxiety. She had hoped the success of her treatments would gradually overcome initial prejudice, but apparently some people remained determined to view her work as threatening rather than helpful. Mrs. Caldwell, Clara said calmly, is there something specific you're concerned about? Concerned? Margaret's voice rose shrilly. My friend Eleanor Mason is violently ill after taking one of your concoctions. She could have died from your reckless experimentation. Dr. Foster appeared in the Visey clinic doorway, her expression alert and professional. What exactly are Mrs. Mason's symptoms? Nausea, vomiting, severe stomach pains, Margaret replied, though she directed her answer toward the crowd rather than the physician. All after drinking that terrible tea you gave her. Clara's mind raced through the treatment she had prepared. Recently, Eleanor Mason had complained of sleeplessness and anxiety, conditions for which Clara had prepared a mild chamomile and lavender blend. Such a gentle mixture should not cause the symptoms Margaret described, unless there had been some misunderstanding about preparation or dosage. Mrs. Caldwell, Clara said carefully, could you describe exactly how Mrs. Mason prepared the tea I gave her? She followed your instructions exactly, Margaret snapped. A handful of the mixture steeped in boiling water. Clara felt a chill of realization. I said a teaspoon of the mixture, not a handful. That's a tenfold difference in concentration. Dr. Foster stepped forward with professional authority. Where is Mrs. Mason now? I need to examine her immediately. At home, too sick to move, Margaret replied, though some of her earlier certainty seemed to be wavering. Mr. Hayes, Dr. Foster said crisply, would you mind accompanying us to examine the patient? Your botanical expertise might be helpful in determining exactly what happened. The walk to the Mason home became something of a procession, with Margaret Caldwell and her supporters trailing along to witness whatever drama might unfold. Clara tried to maintain her composure despite the growing conviction that she was about to be blamed for a serious mistake, possibly ending her brief career in Willowbrook before it had properly begun. Eleanor Mason was indeed ill, though her symptoms seemed less severe than Margaret's dramatic description had suggested. She was pale and nauseated, but alert and able to describe her experience coherently. I was feeling so anxious about my husband's work at the logging camp, she explained. To Dr. Foster, Miss Thompson's tea had helped me sleep better, so when the anxiety got worse, I thought a stronger dose would help more. How much stronger? Dr. Foster asked gently. Eleanor looked embarrassed. I used about 4 spoonfuls instead of 1, and I let it steep much longer than she recommended. I thought it would work faster that way. William Hayes had been examining the remaining tea mixture, and now he looked up with understanding. Mrs. Mason, the herbs Miss Thompson gave you are perfectly safe in proper doses, but any medicine can cause problems if taken in excessive amounts. You essentially gave yourself 10 times the recommended dose. Dr. Foster nodded professionally. It's similar to taking too many laudanum drops or too much willow bark. The remedy itself isn't dangerous, but the dosage makes all the difference. Margaret Caldwell's face had grown increasingly red during this explanation. Are you saying Eleanor brought this on herself? I'm saying, Dr. Foster replied with pointed calm, that Miss Thompson provided appropriate treatment with clear instructions, and the patient chose to modify those instructions without consulting anyone with medical knowledge. Clara felt relief washing through her, followed immediately by concern for Eleanor Mason's continued discomfort. Mrs. Mason, I can prepare something to help settle your stomach and counteract the excessive herbs in your system. That's exactly what she shouldn't do, Margaret protested. Haven't you caused enough trouble? William Hayes spoke up for her. The first time since the examination began. Actually, Mrs. Caldwell, Miss Thompson's suggestion is medically sound. I've seen similar cases of accidental overdose, and the proper treatment is indeed to use other plants to restore balance to the system. His calm, authoritative tone carried weight that Clara's words alone might not have possessed. As a man, and an obvious outsider to local politics, his opinion seemed to influence the gathered crowd in ways that Dr. Foster's professional judgment had not. Clara prepared a simple mixture of mint and ginger to settle Eleanor's stomach, along with instructions to drink plenty of water and rest until the excessive herbs worked their way out of her system. Within an hour, Eleanor was feeling noticeably better and able to eat a light meal. As they walked back toward town, William fell into step beside Clara. "That was well handled," he said quietly. "You remained calm and professional despite being unfairly attacked. Experience with prejudice has taught me that responding with anger only confirms people's worst assumptions," Clara replied. "Though I admit there were moments when I wanted to point out that Mrs. Caldwell has never shown any interest in learning proper plant usage herself," William chuckled. "The people who know the least often speak the loudest. Don't let their ignorance discourage you from continuing your important work." His support meant more to Clara than she could easily express. Having an ally with scientific credentials and obvious expertise made her feel less isolated in her struggle to gain acceptance for traditional plant medicine. "Mr. Hayes," she said as they reached the clinic, "I want to thank you for speaking up today. Your intervention may have prevented serious damage to my reputation. Your reputation should stand on your results, not on the uninformed opinions of people like Margaret Caldwell," William replied firmly. "What you're doing here is valuable scientific work, regardless of how it's perceived by those who don't understand it." Dr. Foster joined them as they stood outside the clinic, her expression thoughtful. "Clara, today's incident highlights something we need to address. Your treatments are becoming popular enough to attract attention from people who might misuse them, either accidentally or deliberately." "What do you suggest?" Clara asked. "I think we need to formalize your position somehow," Dr. Foster mused. "Give you official recognition that would make it harder for people like Margaret Caldwell to dismiss your work as amateur foolishness." William's eyes lit with interest. "There are precedents for that. Several territories have provisions for recognizing traditional healers and herbalists as legitimate medical practitioners, especially when they work under physician supervision." The conversation continued as they moved inside the clinic, but Clara found her attention divided between the practical concerns they were discussing and the growing awareness that William Hayes represented something she hadn't expected to find in Willowbrook. His combination of scientific knowledge, respect for traditional wisdom, and personal integrity made him exactly the kind of person she had always hoped to work alongside. As the afternoon wore on and William prepared to return to his own research, Clara realized that his visit had marked a turning point in her new life. The challenges from people like Margaret Caldwell would continue, but now she had allies who understood the value of her work and were willing to support her against unfair criticism. The future that had seemed so uncertain when she stepped off the stagecoach just weeks ago was beginning to take shape as something far more promising than she had dared to imagine. Summer had settled over Willowbrook like a warm embrace, bringing with it the full flowering of Clara's medicinal garden and an unexpected partnership that was transforming both her work and her heart. William Hayes had extended his research stay in the area, taking lodgings at Grace Morrison's boarding house and spending most of his days collaborating with Clara on what was becoming the most comprehensive botanical survey ever undertaken in the Pacific Northwest. Their working relationship had evolved into something that bordered on magical, with each bringing unique strengths that perfectly complemented the other's abilities. William's scientific training provided structure and credibility to Clara's intuitive knowledge, while her practical experience brought life to his academic theories. Together, they were creating something neither could have achieved alone. On this particular morning, Clara found William already at work in her garden when she emerged from the cottage with her morning coffee. He was carefully sketching the intricate structure of a calendula bloom, his concentration so complete that he didn't notice her approach until she spoke. "The petals are most vibrant just after dawn," she observed, settling beside him on the wooden bench he had built the previous week. Something about the morning dew seems to intensify their color. William looked up with the smile that had become as familiar to Clara as her own reflection. I've noticed that too. There's definitely a correlation between moisture levels and pigment saturation, though I haven't been able to determine the exact mechanism. Clara studied his sketch, marveling as always at his ability to capture not just the appearance of plants, but their essential character. Your drawings are becoming quite famous around town. Mrs. Patterson has been showing everyone the illustrations you made of the herbs that helped her pregnancy. Your treatments helped her pregnancy, William corrected gently. I just documented what you already knew. This was typical of their conversations, each deflecting credit toward the other in a way that spoke of genuine mutual respect. Clara had never experienced a partnership so free of competition or ego, where success was measured not by individual achievement, but by shared understanding. Their morning routine had become precious to Clara, these quiet moments before the day's patients arrived and the demands of the clinic took precedence. William would share his observations from the previous evening's research, while Clara would describe any new developments in her garden or insights gained from treating various ailments. I've been thinking about your suggestion regarding the respiratory treatment, William said, closing his notebook and giving her his full attention. The combination of coltsfoot and mullein makes perfect sense from a physiological standpoint. Clara had proposed the mixture after treating several log-in camp workers who suffered from persistent coughs caused by sawdust inhalation. Traditional medicine typically relied on harsh treatments that often did more harm than good, but the gentle herbs had proved remarkably effective. My grandmother always said that the lungs needed soothing rather than forcing, Clara replied. She would have loved to meet someone who could explain why her methods worked so well. William's expression grew thoughtful. I wish I could have met her. The knowledge she passed down to you represents generations of careful observation and experimentation. It's invaluable scientific data, even if it wasn't recorded in formal studies. Dr. Foster emerged from the clinic at that moment, carrying her medical bag and wearing the determined expression that usually meant an emergency. Call. Good morning, you two. William, I'm glad you're here. We have a situation that could use both your expertise. Clara immediately set down her coffee and rose to follow. What's happened? Accident at the lumber mill, Dr. Foster explained as they walked quickly toward town. One of the workers got caught in the machinery and suffered severe lacerations. The bleeding is controlled, but there's significant tissue damage that will require careful treatment to prevent infection. William gathered his collection materials without question, understanding that his botanical knowledge might be needed for preparing antiseptic treatments. Clara mentally cataloged the plants that could help with wound healing and infection prevention, already planning the combinations that would be most effective. The scene at the lumber mill was controlled chaos, with Robert Caldwell directing operations while Dr. Foster tended to the injured man. Clara recognized the patient as James Murphy, a young Irishman who had arrived in Willowbrook just months earlier seeking work in the booming lumber industry. How severe are the wounds? Clara asked Dr. Foster as she examined the deep gashes on Murphy's arm and shoulder. Severe enough to require significant intervention, Dr. Foster replied grimly. The cuts are clean, which is fortunate, but they're deep and there's a high risk of infection given the contaminated environment where the accident occurred. Clara knelt beside the injured man, noting the pallor of his face and the rapid pulse that indicated shock and blood loss. Mr. Murphy, I'm going to prepare some treatments that will help your wounds heal properly. You may feel some stinging at first, but it will help prevent infection. Murphy managed a weak nod, his Irish accent thick with pain as he spoke. Do whatever you need to, miss. I can't afford to lose work time to infection. William had been conferring quietly with Dr. Foster about the medical aspects of the case, and now he approached Clara with a serious expression. What are you thinking for treatment? The autumn air carried the scent of changing leaves and Wood smoke as Clara Thompson walked through Willowbrook's main street, her basket filled with the last harvest from her medicinal garden. 6 months had passed since her arrival as a rejected mail-order bride, and the transformation in both her circumstances and the town's perception of her seemed almost miraculous. Where once she had faced suspicion and hostility, she now received respectful greetings from shopkeepers and grateful smiles from patients whose lives had been improved by her treatments. William Hayes had become an integral part of her daily routine, their botanical research having evolved into something far deeper than professional collaboration. His gentle courtship had been as natural as the changing seasons, built on shared passions and mutual respect rather than desperate necessity. Clara found herself falling in love, not just with his brilliant mind and kind heart, but with the way he saw her as an equal partner in their scientific endeavors. This morning brought an unusual summons that would test everything she had built in Willowbrook. Mayor James Mitchell had requested her presence at an emergency town council meeting, along with Dr. Foster and William. The formal tone of the invitation suggested serious business, though Clara couldn't imagine what municipal matter might require her botanical expertise. Grace Morrison intercepted her on the way to the town hall, her usually cheerful expression clouded with concern. "Clara, dear, I wanted to warn you about what you might be walking into. There's been talk among certain folks about challenging your position in the community." Clara felt a familiar knot of anxiety form in her stomach. What kind of challenge? "Nothing specific that I've heard, but Margaret Caldwell has been holding meetings with some of the other prominent ladies. They've been questioning whether it's appropriate for an unmarried woman to be practicing medicine, even under Dr. Foster's supervision." The criticism struck Clara as particularly unfair given her success in treating dozens of patients, but she recognized the pattern of opposition that seemed to emerge whenever her work gained too much recognition. "I suppose I should have expected this. Success tends to make enemies as well as friends." Grace's expression grew fierce with protective anger. "You've done nothing but help people, Clara. Don't let their small-mindedness discourage you from the good work you're doing." William appeared at Clara's side, his presence immediately steadying her nerves. He had developed an uncanny ability to sense when she needed support, appearing at crucial moments with quiet strength that helped her face whatever challenges arose. "Ready for whatever awaits us in there?" he asked, gesturing toward the town hall where people were already gathering for the meeting. Clara straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin with determination. "As ready as I can be, though I confess I'm not sure what to expect." The town hall was packed with residents, their faces reflecting the divisions that had developed around Clara's presence in the community. On one side sat her supporters, patients she had treated successfully, Grace Morrison and her allies, and several progressive-minded residents who valued her contributions. On the other side clustered Margaret Caldwell's faction, their expressions ranging from disapproving to openly hostile. Mayor Mitchell called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance, his weathered face showing the strain of trying to mediate between opposing factions. "We're here today to address concerns that have been raised about certain medical practices in our community. Mrs. Caldwell has requested the opportunity to present her case." Margaret Caldwell rose with theatrical dignity, her elaborate dress and carefully arranged hair speaking of preparation for this moment. "Citizens of Willowbrook, we face a threat to our community's moral standards and public safety. A woman with no formal medical training has been allowed to experiment on our neighbors and family members, using dangerous plant concoctions that could poison or kill innocent people." Clara felt William's hand briefly touch hers in a gesture of support, while Dr. Foster's jaw tightened with professional indignation. The accusations were both unfair and factually incorrect, but Clara knew that truth didn't always prevail in public forums, where emotion carried more weight than evidence. Margaret continued her attack with increasing fervor. "This woman arrived in our town under false pretenses, rejected by her intended husband for bizarre and unnatural behavior. instead of accepting her rejection gracefully and leaving our community in peace. She has wormed her way into a position of influence where she can spread her peculiar ideas and dangerous practices. Several voices murmured agreement from Margaret's supporters, while others shifted uncomfortably at the harsh characterization of Clara's arrival and subsequent achievements. Clara forced herself to remain calm despite the personal nature of the attacks, knowing that any emotional response would be seen as confirmation of Margaret's accusations. Furthermore, Margaret declared, warming to her theme, "This woman has corrupted Dr. Foster's previously respectable practice with primitive superstitions masquerading as medicine. She has also ensnared an educated gentleman with her unnatural knowledge, preventing him from pursuing proper scientific work." William started to rise in protest, but Clara placed a restraining hand on his arm. This was her fight, and she needed to face it without appearing to hide behind male protection. Mayor Mitchell looked uncomfortable with the direction of Margaret's presentation. "Mrs. Caldwell, do you have specific evidence of harm caused by Miss Thompson's treatments?" Margaret's confidence wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "The potential for harm is obvious to anyone with sense. Eating flowers and weeds, mixing unknown substances, treating serious ailments with garden plants instead of proper medicine. It's only a matter of time before someone dies from her reckless experimentation." Dr. Foster stood with professional authority, her voice cutting through Margaret's hysteria with calm precision. "I'd like to address these allegations with actual facts rather than speculation and prejudice." The room quieted as the respected physician prepared to speak. Clara felt a surge of gratitude for Helen Foster's unwavering support, even as she recognized that this confrontation would test all their relationships. "In the 6 months that Miss Thompson has been working with me," Dr. Foster began, "she has treated over 100 patients with consistently positive results. Not a single person has suffered adverse effects from her treatments, and dozens have experienced complete recovery from conditions that conventional medicine had failed to address." She pulled out a leather-bound record book, its pages filled with detailed case notes. Mrs. Patterson's severe pregnancy nausea resolved completely. The respiratory ailments of 12 logging camp workers all improved dramatically. Mrs. Henderson's chronic digestive problems eliminated entirely. Mr. Murphy's infected wounds from the mill accident healed without complications. The recitation of successful treatments had a visible effect on the crowd, with many people nodding in recognition of cases they had witnessed personally. Clara saw doubt creeping into the expressions of some who had initially supported Margaret's position. Dr. Foster continued with growing authority. "Miss Thompson's knowledge of botanical medicine has enhanced our ability to treat patients effectively while reducing their suffering and recovery time. Her methods are based on centuries of proven traditional use, not reckless experimentation." Margaret Caldwell's face had grown red with frustration at having her accusations systematically dismantled. "Dr. Foster, you're a trained physician. Surely you don't believe that flower petals and garden weeds can replace real medicine." "I believe that effective treatment comes from understanding how to help the body heal itself," Dr. Foster replied firmly. "Miss Thompson's plant-based remedies often work better than conventional medicines with fewer harmful side effects." William Hayes rose from his seat, his academic credentials lending weight to his words. "If I may address the scientific aspects of this discussion, Miss Thompson's botanical knowledge represents sophisticated understanding of plant chemistry and therapeutic applications. Her treatments are based on compounds that modern pharmaceutical research is only beginning to identify and synthesize." He pulled out his research notebook, filled with detailed documentation of Clara's methods and results. "I've been studying traditional plant medicine throughout the Pacific Northwest, and Miss Thompson's expertise surpasses that of university-trained botanists in terms of practical application and therapeutic effectiveness." The crowd stirred with interest at this endorsement from someone with obvious scientific credentials. Clara felt her heart swell with love and gratitude for William's public support, even as she recognized that his defense would likely intensify Margaret's personal attacks on their relationship. Margaret seized on this opening immediately. "Mr. Hayes, isn't it true that this woman has compromised your objectivity through inappropriate personal involvement? How can we trust your judgment when you're obviously infatuated with her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Clara felt every eye in the room focus on William's response. She held her breath, knowing that his answer would affect not just her professional standing, but their personal future together. William's blue eyes met Clara's for a moment, before he addressed the room with quiet dignity. "Mrs. Caldwell, my professional assessment of Miss Thompson's abilities is based on months of careful observation and documentation. My personal feelings don't alter the scientific facts I've recorded." He paused, then continued with unexpected boldness. "However, since you've raised the subject of personal involvement, I'd like to make an announcement. I've asked Miss Thompson to marry me, and she has accepted." Gasps and murmurs erupted throughout the room as this news registered. Clara felt shock and joy warring in her chest, since William's proposal had been private and tentative, awaiting resolution of her professional challenges before any public announcement. Margaret Caldwell looked as though she had swallowed something unpleasant. "This proves my point exactly. The man's judgment has been compromised by romantic infatuation." "On the contrary," William replied with a smile that transformed his serious face, "my judgment has been enhanced by the opportunity to observe Miss Thompson's character, intelligence, and dedication on a daily basis. I consider myself fortunate beyond measure to have won the affection of such a remarkable woman." The room buzzed with excited conversation as people processed this unexpected development. Clara saw approval and pleasure in many faces, particularly among the women who had been helped by her treatments and had grown to respect her abilities. Mayor Mitchell banged his gavel to restore order. "While this is certainly happy news for the couple involved, we still need to address the concerns that called this meeting." An elderly man near the back of the room stood slowly, his weathered hands gripping a walking stick for support. Clara recognized him as Samuel Whitmore, one of Willowbrook's original settlers and a man whose opinion carried considerable weight in the community. "I'd like to say something about this young lady's character," Whitmore said in a voice that carried despite his age. "My granddaughter Alice was dying of fever last month when Dr. Foster was called away to the logging camps. Miss Thompson sat with that child for 2 days and nights, using her plant medicines and careful nursing to bring down the fever and save Alice's life." His voice grew stronger as he continued. "My granddaughter is alive today because Miss Thompson cared more about helping a sick child than about her own comfort or reputation. Anyone who calls that kind of dedication dangerous or unnatural doesn't understand what real medicine is about." Several voices called out agreement, and other people began standing to share their own stories of Clara's care and successful treatments. The momentum in the room was shifting decisively away from Margaret's accusations and toward recognition of Clara's contributions to the community. Tom Morrison, Grace's son, spoke from his position near the door. "Miss Thompson has helped more people in 6 months than some folks do in a lifetime. She's earned her place in this community through good works, not pretty speeches." Dr. Foster stood again, her professional authority commanding attention. "I'd like to propose a formal resolution to this matter. I recommend that the town council officially recognize Miss Thompson as a qualified herbalist and traditional healer, working under medical supervision to provide botanical treatments to willing patients." The suggestion created another stir of conversation as people considered the implications of formal recognition. Clara felt her heart racing with the possibility of official acceptance after months of operating under the cloud of informal tolerance. Mayor Mitchell looked around the room, clearly assessing the community sentiment. "Is there a second to Dr. Foster's motion?" "I second it," called out Mrs. Patterson, the first patient Clara had successfully treated. Several other voices joined in support. Margaret Caldwell made one final attempt to rally opposition. "This is a dangerous precedent. We'll be encouraging every charlatan and snake oil salesman who passes through town." "Mrs. Caldwell, Mayor," Mitchell said with obvious patience, "Miss Thompson has demonstrated her abilities through consistent results and professional behavior. The motion is to recognize existing competence, not to lower standards for others." The vote, when it came, was decisive in Clara's favor. Only a handful of residents supported Margaret's position, while the majority endorsed the formal recognition of Clara's role in the community's medical care. As the meeting concluded and people began filing out, Clara found herself surrounded by well-wishers offering congratulations on both her professional recognition and her engagement to William. The contrast with her arrival 6 months earlier could not have been more dramatic. Grace Morrison embraced her warmly. "I'm so proud of you, dear. You've shown this town what real strength and character look like." Dr. Foster joined them with obvious satisfaction. "This official recognition will give you legal protection for your practice and formal standing in the medical community. It's well-deserved." William appeared at Clara's side, slipping his arm around her waist with gentle possessiveness. "I hope you didn't mind my announcing our engagement so publicly. The moment seemed right for making our intentions clear." Clara leaned into his embrace, feeling the rightness of their partnership in every fiber of her being. It was perfect timing. "I can't imagine facing these challenges without you beside me." As they walked home through the autumn evening, Clara reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. The violets she had eaten on her first day in Willowbrook had seemed like the catalyst for disaster, but they had actually been the first step toward finding her true purpose and the love of her life. Margaret Caldwell's final challenge had ultimately served to strengthen Clara's position in the community by forcing a public acknowledgement of her contributions and abilities. The formal recognition would make it much harder for future opposition to undermine her work. Most importantly, the confrontation had revealed the depth of support she had built among the people who mattered most, the patients she had helped, the colleagues who respected her abilities, and the man who loved her for exactly who she was. The cottage behind Dr. Foster's clinic had become a true home, its garden a testament to the healing power of plants and the transformative power of knowledge applied with compassion. Tomorrow would bring new patients to treat, new plants to study, and new opportunities to serve the community that had become her own. As Clara and William stood together in the moonlit garden, surrounded by the herbs that had helped establish her reputation and the flowers that had first revealed her unusual gifts, she knew that her grandmother would be proud of how the ancient wisdom had found new expression in this frontier town. The mail-order bride who had been rejected for eating flowers had become a respected healer whose botanical knowledge was officially recognized and valued. The strange woman who had once been shunned now stood at the center of a loving community, with a devoted partner who understood that her unusual gifts were exactly what made her extraordinary. The sweet love promised in her story's beginning had indeed bloomed, nurtured by mutual respect, shared purpose, and the simple truth that hearts, like gardens, flourish best when tended with patience, understanding, and care. The golden light of late summer painted Willowbrook in shades of amber and honey as Clara Thompson made her way through the town square, her arms laden with fresh herbs from her thriving garden. 4 months had passed since William Hayes first appeared at Dr. Foster's clinic, and their collaboration had blossomed into something far deeper than professional partnership. The botanical research that had brought them together now served as the foundation for a love as natural and enduring as the plants they studied together. Clara paused outside Brennan's general store to adjust her burden of aromatic bundles, each carefully selected for the remedies she would prepare that afternoon. The townspeople who passed offered friendly greetings, a stark contrast to the suspicious stares she had endured upon her arrival. Mrs. Henderson stopped to thank her again for the digestive tonic that had finally ended months of stomach troubles. While young Timothy Blake showed off the scar on his arm where Clara's calendula salve had healed a nasty cut without infection. The transformation in community attitudes had been gradual but undeniable. Success in healing had a way of overcoming even the deepest prejudices, and Clara's gentle manner with patients had won hearts that might otherwise have remained closed to her unconventional methods. Still, she remained aware that not everyone had embraced her presence in Willowbrook, and whispers of disapproval still followed her through certain social circles. William emerged from the post office as Clara approached, his face lighting with the smile she had come to treasure above all earthly pleasures. In his hands he carried a thick envelope bearing the seal of the territorial government, his expression mixing excitement with nervous anticipation. "News from the capital," he announced, falling into step beside her as they walked toward the clinic. "The Territorial Medical Board has responded to our proposal." Clara felt her heart skip with hope and anxiety. For weeks, William and Dr. Foster had been working to secure official recognition for her botanical practice, arguing that her traditional knowledge deserved the same respect accorded to formally trained healers. The outcome of their petition would determine whether her work could continue to grow and flourish, or whether she would remain forever relegated to the margins of acceptable medical practice. "What do they say?" Clara asked, though she wasn't certain she was ready to hear the answer. William's smile widened as he broke the official seal. "They've agreed to send an inspector to evaluate your methods and results. If the assessment proves favorable, you'll receive certification as a registered herbalist under the supervision of a licensed physician." The news struck Clara like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Official recognition would protect her from the kind of challenges Margaret Caldwell and her allies had been mounting with increasing frequency. More importantly, it would validate the knowledge her grandmother had spent a lifetime passing down, elevating it from local folklore to acknowledged medical practice. "When will the inspector arrive?" Clara managed to ask through the emotion tightening her throat. "Within the month," William replied, taking her arm to steady her as the full implications sank in. "Dr. Foster believes we have an excellent chance of approval, given your success rate and the documented cases we've compiled." They had reached the clinic where Dr. Foster waited with her own share of exciting news. The progressive physician had been invited to present their collaborative work at the Territorial Medical Conference, an honor that would bring their botanical research to the attention of doctors throughout the Pacific Northwest. "This could change everything," Dr. Foster explained as they gathered in her office to discuss the upcoming challenges. "If we can demonstrate the effectiveness of traditional plant medicine to the medical establishment, it might open doors for other practitioners with similar knowledge." Clara felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders alongside the excitement of possibility. Her personal success had evolved into something larger, a chance to prove that wisdom passed down through generations of women healers deserved respect and formal recognition. Over the following weeks, Clara threw herself into preparation for the inspector's visit with an intensity that impressed even William. She organized her garden to showcase the systematic cultivation of medicinal plants, prepared detailed records of every treatment she had provided, and gathered testimonials from grateful patients whose lives had been improved by her care. William contributed his scientific expertise to documenting the chemical properties of her remedies, while Dr. Foster compiled medical case studies that demonstrated the effectiveness of botanical treatments for conditions ranging from respiratory ailments to digestive disorders. Together, they built a compelling argument for the legitimacy of Clara's practice. The inspector, when he finally arrived, proved to be a surprise. Dr. Marcus Webb was younger than expected, with the kind of open-minded curiosity that suggested he might actually listen to their arguments rather than dismissing them out of hand. His credentials were impeccable, his reputation for fairness well established, but Clara couldn't shake her nervousness as she prepared to defend everything she held dear. The evaluation began in Clara's garden, where she explained the principles behind her cultivation methods and the reasoning that guided her selection of plants for different therapeutic purposes. Dr. Webb asked thoughtful questions that revealed genuine interest in her techniques, taking detailed notes as she described the traditional knowledge that informed her choices. This systematic approach is quite sophisticated, Dr. Webb observed as they moved through the carefully organized sections of healing plants. How did you learn to categorize plants according to their therapeutic properties? Clara chose her words carefully, aware that too much emphasis on folk tradition might undermine her credibility with someone trained in conventional medicine. My grandmother taught me to observe the effects of different plants on various ailments, then group them according to their most reliable applications. Over time, patterns emerged that helped guide treatment decisions. William stepped forward to add his scientific perspective. Miss Thompson's empirical approach mirrors the observational methods used by the most respected researchers in botanical medicine. Her results demonstrate the validity of her classification system. The inspection continued through the clinic, where Dr. Webb reviewed Clara's treatment records and spoke with several patients about their experiences. Mrs. Patterson enthusiastically described how Clara's remedies had eliminated the severe nausea that had threatened her pregnancy, while James Murphy showed off his completely healed arm and credited Clara's wound treatments with preventing the infection that could have cost him his livelihood. Dr. Foster presented the medical documentation they had compiled, emphasizing the consistent success rates and the absence of adverse reactions in Clara's treatments. The formal case studies lent credibility to what might otherwise have been dismissed as anecdotal evidence. As the day progressed, Clara began to sense a shift in Dr. Webb's demeanor, from professional skepticism to genuine admiration. His questions grew more detailed and specific, focusing on the mechanisms behind her most successful treatments rather than challenging their basic validity. The crucial moment came when Mrs. Anderson arrived at the clinic in obvious distress, carrying her feverish infant son. The baby had been suffering from respiratory problems that conventional treatments had failed to address, and his condition was clearly worsening. Dr. Foster examined the child while Clara prepared a gentle steam treatment using eucalyptus and chamomile, carefully adjusting the concentration for an infant's delicate system. Dr. Webb observed intently as Clara demonstrated the preparation technique, explaining her reasoning for each ingredient and dosage adjustment. Within minutes of beginning the aromatherapy treatment, the baby's labored breathing began to ease. His fever broke shortly afterward, and by evening he was nursing normally and sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. Remarkable, Dr. Webb murmured as he documented the rapid improvement. I've seen similar cases take days or weeks to resolve with conventional treatments. Clara felt a surge of quiet pride, not in her own abilities but in the ancient wisdom her grandmother had entrusted to her care. Every successful treatment validated the knowledge that had been passed down through generations of healing women, proving that traditional methods deserve their place alongside modern medicine. The inspector's final report, delivered 3 days later, exceeded even Dr. Foster's optimistic expectations. Dr. Webb recommended Clara for full certification as a registered herbalist, praising her systematic approach, excellent results, and professional conduct. More significantly, he suggested that her methods be studied and potentially adopted by other medical practitioners throughout the territory. The celebration that followed brought together everyone who had supported Clara's journey from rejected mail-order bride to respected healer. Grace Morrison hosted the gathering in her boarding house garden, where tables groaned under the weight of dishes contributed by grateful patients and newfound friends. William found Clara during a quiet moment between toasts and congratulations, drawing her aside to a secluded corner of the garden where roses bloomed in abundance. The late afternoon sun caught the silver threads in his dark hair as he took her hands in his his expression serious despite the festive atmosphere around them. "Clara," he said softly, "I have something to ask you, and I hope you'll forgive me for choosing such a public occasion." Before she could respond, William dropped to one knee, producing a simple gold ring set with a small but perfectly cut emerald. The green stone caught the light like captured sunlight, beautiful in its simplicity and obvious sincerity. "Clara Thompson," William continued, his voice carrying clearly enough for the gathered crowd to hear, "you've shown me that love can grow from the most unexpected beginnings, that wisdom comes in forms I never learned to recognize, and that partnership between equals can create something more beautiful than either person could achieve alone." The garden had fallen silent around them, guests pausing in their conversations to witness this moment of private emotion made public declaration. Clara felt tears gathering in her eyes as William spoke the words she had dreamed of hearing. "Will you marry me, my dearest Clara? Will you be my wife, my partner, my collaborator in all the adventures that await us?" The answer came from her heart without hesitation, clear and strong enough for everyone to hear. "Yes, William Hayes. Nothing would make me happier than to spend my life loving you and working beside you." The applause that erupted from their friends and supporters seemed to shake the very foundations of Willowbrook, a celebration of love triumphing over prejudice and wisdom finding its proper recognition at last. As William slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, she marveled at how perfectly it fit, as though it had been made specifically for her hand. Dr. Foster stepped forward to offer the first toast, raising her glass of elderberry wine with obvious emotion. "To Clara and William, whose partnership has enriched our entire community and whose love story proves that the best matches are built on mutual respect and shared purpose." The celebration continued long into the evening, with neighbors sharing stories about Clara's treatments and William's patient documentation of local plant life. Children played among the herb gardens, while adults discussed plans for expanding the botanical research that had brought the couple together. As the evening wound down and guests began making their way home, Clara and William found themselves alone in the garden where so much of their courtship had unfolded. The scent of night-blooming jasmine filled the air, its sweet fragrance a perfect complement to the contentment filling Clara's heart. "I still can't quite believe this is real," Clara confessed, leaning into William's embrace as they watched the last of their friends disappear into the gathering dusk. "6 months ago, I was eating violets by the roadside and being rejected as unsuitable for civilized society." William's arms tightened around her, his voice warm with affection and admiration. "Those violets were the luckiest flowers in Oregon Territory. They revealed your true nature to anyone wise enough to recognize it, and they led you directly to the life you were meant to live." Clara turned in his arms to study his beloved face, still amazed that this brilliant, gentle man had chosen to love her for exactly who she was. "My grandmother always said that nature provides everything we need, if we're brave enough to trust its wisdom. I think she would have liked you very much. I would have been honored to meet her," William replied sincerely. "Her granddaughter has taught me more about the healing power of plants than years of academic study ever could." They stood together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the garden that had become a symbol of their growing love and shared dedication to healing. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as they planned their wedding and continued building their botanical practice. But tonight belonged to the quiet joy of promises made and dreams within reach. The cottage behind Dr. Foster's clinic had become Clara's sanctuary, its rooms filled with the tools of her trade and the evidence of her success. Pressed flowers decorated the walls alongside William's detailed botanical illustrations, while shelves held jars of dried herbs and bottles of carefully prepared tinctures. It was a home built on knowledge and service, exactly the kind of place her grandmother would have blessed. As Clara prepared for bed that night, she caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The woman looking back At her bore little resemblance to the desperate mail-order bride who had stepped off the stagecoach in Willowbrook. This Clara stood straight with confidence earned through hard work and dedication, her eyes bright with purpose and love, her hands skilled in the ancient art of healing. The transformation had been gradual but complete, built one successful treatment at a time, one grateful patient after another, one day of proving her worth to a skeptical community. The violets that had once marked her as strange now symbolized the unique gifts that made her valuable beyond measure. William's proposal had been perfect in its timing and setting, a public declaration that formalized what their hearts had known for months. Their love had grown like the plants in her garden, nurtured by daily care and attention, strengthened by shared storms and sunshine, until it bloomed into something beautiful and enduring. The official recognition of her botanical practice represented more than personal validation. It opened doors for other women with traditional healing knowledge, creating pathways for wisdom that might otherwise be lost to history. Clara felt the weight of that responsibility alongside the joy of achievement, knowing that her success could inspire others to pursue their own calling to heal and serve. As she settled into sleep in her comfortable cottage, surrounded by the scents of healing herbs and the sounds of a community at peace, Clara offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path from rejection to recognition had been neither straight nor easy, but every challenge had ultimately strengthened her resolve and deepened her appreciation for the gifts she had been given. The mail-order bride who had been shunned for eating flowers had become a certified herbalist whose knowledge was sought and valued throughout the territory. The strange woman who had once faced ridicule now commanded respect from medical professionals and grateful patients alike. Most importantly, the lonely widow who had risked everything for a chance at belonging had found not just acceptance, but deep, abiding love with someone who cherished her exactly as she was. The sweet love promised in her story had indeed triumphed, proving that hearts, like gardens, produce the most beautiful flowers when tended with patience, understanding, and unwavering faith in their potential to bloom. The crisp October air carried the scent of wood smoke and dying leaves as Clara Thompson Hayes stepped out of the small church in Willowbrook, her hand nestled securely in that of her new husband. The simple ceremony had been everything she could have dreamed, attended by every patient she had healed, every friend she had made, and even some former skeptics who had come to witness the union of the town's most beloved healer with the brilliant botanist who had captured her heart. William's eyes shone with joy as he helped her navigate the church steps in her grandmother's ivory silk dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit Clara's slender frame. The gown carried with it the blessing of generations of strong women, and Clara felt their presence as surely as she felt the October sunshine warming her face. Grace Morrison had woven wildflowers into Clara's auburn hair, creating a crown of autumn blooms that seemed to glow against the rich fabric. The wedding feast spread across tables in the town square showcased the abundance of the harvest season, but it was enhanced by Clara's own contributions. Edible flowers decorated every dish, their delicate flavors adding unexpected notes of sweetness and complexity to familiar foods. Rose petals graced the wedding cake, violet syrup sweetened the punch, and nasturtium leaves added peppery brightness to the salads. What had once marked Clara as strange now served as a celebration of her unique gifts. Dr. Helen Foster raised the first toast with elderflower wine Clara had crafted herself. To Clara and William Hayes, whose partnership has shown us all that love grows strongest when nurtured by mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to embrace what makes each person extraordinary. The applause that followed seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains, a sound of pure joy that spoke to how completely Clara had won the hearts of her adopted community. Even Margaret Caldwell had attended the ceremony, though she maintained a stiff demeanor that suggested her acceptance was more grudging than genuine. As the celebration continued into the afternoon, Clara found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The scared young woman who had eaten violets by the roadside seemed like a character from someone else's story. So complete was her transformation from outcast to cherished community member. Tom Morrison approached with his characteristic gentle smile, carrying a beautifully carved wooden box that caught the afternoon light. "Wedding gift from Ma and me," he explained, presenting the box to Clara with obvious pride in his craftsmanship. "Thought you might like something special for storing your seeds and dried flowers." Clara accepted the gift with tears of gratitude, running her fingers over the intricate floral patterns Tom had carved into the lid. The box was both beautiful and practical, exactly the kind of thoughtful present that spoke to how well her friends understood her passions. "Tom, this is absolutely beautiful," Clara managed through her emotion. "I'll treasure it always." Grace Morrison joined them, her weathered face glowing with maternal pride as she watched Clara examine her son's handiwork. "That boy spent 3 months on that box, working on it every evening after finishing at the forge. Said it had to be perfect for the woman who saved half the town with her plant medicine." The reminder of her healing work brought Clara a deep sense of satisfaction that had nothing to do with personal recognition. Over the past months, she had treated everything from childhood fevers to workplace injuries, always with the gentle touch and careful observation her grandmother had taught her. Each successful treatment had built not just her reputation, but her confidence in the value of traditional knowledge. William appeared at her side, slipping his arm around her waist with the easy familiarity that had developed during their courtship. His presence steadied her, as it always did, providing the quiet strength that made every challenge seem manageable. "Mrs. Hayes," he said softly, using her new name for the first time since the ceremony. "Ready to begin our adventure as husband and wife?" The title sent a thrill through Clara that had nothing to do with social convention and everything to do with the promise of partnership it represented. Their marriage was built on equality and mutual respect, a joining of two people whose individual strengths would create something greater than either could achieve alone. "More than ready, Mr. Hayes," Clara replied, leaning into his embrace, as they watched their friends and neighbors celebrating around them. "Though I confess I'm still amazed that this is real and not some wonderful dream." Dr. Foster approached them with news that would make their wedding day even more memorable. She carried an official-looking envelope bearing the territorial seal, her expression mixing excitement with professional satisfaction. "This arrived this morning," she announced, offering the envelope to Clara. "I thought you might want to read it today, surrounded by everyone who supported your journey." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal and unfolded the formal document inside. The official certification was everything they had hoped for and more, recognizing her not just as a qualified herbalist, but as an innovator whose methods deserved study and emulation throughout the Pacific Northwest. "The Territorial Medical Board has invited you to establish a training program for other traditional healers," Dr. Foster explained as Clara stared at the document in amazement. "They want you to teach other women with botanical knowledge how to document and formalize their practices." The implications of the offer struck Clara like lightning. This wasn't just personal recognition, but an opportunity to preserve and legitimize the healing traditions that had been passed down through generations of women like her grandmother. She could help ensure that ancient wisdom wouldn't be lost to the march of modern medicine, but would instead find its rightful place alongside conventional treatments. William's pride in her achievement shone from his face as he read the official invitation over her shoulder. "Clara, this is extraordinary. You'll be able to help other healers gain the same recognition you fought so hard to achieve." The thought of teaching other women to value and document their traditional knowledge filled Clara with purpose that went far beyond personal satisfaction. Each healer she trained would carry forward the wisdom of generations, creating a network of qualified practitioners who could serve communities throughout the territory. As the wedding celebration began to wind down and guests started making their way home, Clara and William found themselves alone in the garden behind what would now be their shared cottage. The space had been transformed with wedding decorations, but underneath the festive additions lay the familiar beds of healing plants that had become the foundation of Clara's new life. "I keep thinking about my grandmother," Clara confided as they walked among the plants that rustled softly in the evening breeze. She would have been so proud to see traditional healing recognized by the Territorial Medical Board. William's hand tightened around hers, offering comfort for the bittersweet joy of achievement tempered by loss. "She is proud, Clara. Her wisdom lives on through you, and now you'll pass it on to others who need guidance and recognition." They paused beside the patch of violets Clara had transplanted from the roadside where her journey began, the small, purple flowers seeming to glow in the gathering dusk. These were the descendants of the blooms that had marked her as different, that had led to her rejection by Robert Caldwell, but ultimately brought her to the life she was meant to live. "Funny how something so small can change everything," Clara mused, kneeling to touch the delicate petals. "If I hadn't eaten those violets, I might have married Robert Caldwell and spent my life pretending to be someone I wasn't." William knelt beside her, his scientist's eye appreciating both the beauty and the significance of the humble flowers. "Sometimes what appears to be our greatest weakness turns out to be our most valuable strength. Your willingness to trust your grandmother's teachings, even when others mocked them, led you to everything you have now." As they rose and continued their tour of the garden that would now serve both their needs, Clara felt a deep sense of completion that had nothing to do with the ending of her story and everything to do with the beginning of a new chapter. Marriage to William meant partnership in every sense, the joining of his scientific knowledge with her traditional wisdom to create something neither could have achieved alone. The cottage they would share had been expanded to accommodate William's research materials alongside Clara's medicinal preparations. Books on botanical classification sat next to jars of dried herbs, while his pressed flower specimens hung on walls beside bundles of healing plants. It was a home that celebrated both the scientific and the traditional, a perfect reflection of their complementary approaches to understanding the natural world. Their wedding night was spent not in passionate embrace, but in quiet conversation about their dreams for the future, the research they would conduct together, and the healing they would bring to communities throughout the territory. Clara had never imagined that marriage could be such a meeting of minds and hearts, a partnership that enhanced rather than diminished her individual identity. The weeks that followed their wedding brought a steady stream of visitors seeking Clara's help with various ailments, but now they also came seeking William's expertise in plant identification and cultivation. Their combined knowledge created a resource unlike anything available elsewhere in the territory, drawing people from hundreds of miles away to benefit from their unique collaboration. Clara began work on the training program the Territorial Medical Board had requested, developing a curriculum that would teach other traditional healers how to document their methods and achieve formal recognition. The program would preserve invaluable knowledge while elevating the status of women who had been practicing healing arts without proper acknowledgement of their skills. William's research expanded to include the documentation of healing practices among the indigenous peoples of the region, work that required delicate diplomacy, but promised to preserve knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Together, they were building a bridge between traditional wisdom and modern science that would benefit generations to come. The first snowfall of winter found Clara in her expanded garden, carefully harvesting the last of the season's medicinal plants while William documented the optimal timing for each collection. Their partnership had evolved into a seamless collaboration where each anticipated the other's needs and contributed unique strengths to their shared endeavors. Margaret Caldwell appeared unexpectedly at the garden gate, her expression uncharacteristically humble as she approached Clara with obvious reluctance. The confrontation Clara had been expecting since the wedding finally seemed to be arriving, though Margaret's demeanor suggested something other than hostility. "Mrs. Hayes," Margaret began formally, her voice lacking its usual sharp edge, "I've come to ask for your help." Clara straightened from her harvesting, wiping her hands on her apron as she studied Margaret's face for signs of her true intentions. "What kind of help do you need, Mrs. Caldwell?" Margaret's composure cracked slightly, revealing vulnerability Clara had never seen before. "My daughter Sarah has been suffering from severe melancholy since her husband's death in the logging accident. She won't eat, barely sleeps, and seems to be wasting away before our eyes. The doctor says there's nothing more he can do." The admission cost Margaret considerable pride. Clara realized, understanding that approaching her for help represented a significant swallowing of previous prejudices. Grief was a condition Clara had treated before, using gentle herbs to ease the worst symptoms while time worked its own healing. "I'd be happy to help your daughter," Clara replied without hesitation, setting aside personal grievances in favor of professional compassion. Grief is one of the most difficult ailments to treat, but there are plants that can ease the worst of the suffering while the heart learns to carry its burden. Margaret's relief was visible, though she struggled to maintain her dignity while expressing gratitude to the woman she had opposed so vigorously. "I appreciate your willingness to help, especially given our past disagreements." Clara gathered the herbs she would need for a gentle remedy designed to ease anxiety and promote restful sleep, explaining each component's purpose as she worked. Margaret listened intently, her scientific curiosity overcoming her previous dismissal of plant medicine. The treatment proved successful over the following weeks, with Sarah Caldwell gradually emerging from the depths of her grief to begin engaging with life again. Margaret's gratitude manifested in unexpected ways, including a public acknowledgement of Clara's skills that helped convert some of the last remaining skeptics in the community. Spring's arrival brought news that would change Clara and William's lives in ways they had never anticipated. A letter from the territorial capital offered William a position as chief botanist for the Pacific Northwest region, while inviting Clara to establish her healing school at the Territorial Medical College. The opportunities represented the culmination of everything they had worked toward, but they also meant leaving Willowbrook and the community that had become their home. The decision proved more difficult than either had expected. Willowbrook had given Clara the chance to rebuild her life and discover her true calling, while providing William with research opportunities and the love of his life. Leaving felt like abandoning the people who had supported their unconventional partnership and benefited from their combined expertise. Dr. Foster helped them reach their final decision during a long conversation in the clinic where Clara's journey had truly begun. "Your work here has been extraordinary," she acknowledged, "but imagine the impact you could have training dozens of healers instead of treating individual patients. The knowledge you've gained in Willowbrook could benefit the entire Turi." The wisdom of her mentor's advice became clear as Clara considered the broader implications of their choice. By accepting the territorial positions, they could establish programs that would train traditional healers throughout the Pacific Northwest, preserving and legitimizing knowledge that might otherwise be lost. Their departure from Willowbrook was marked by a celebration that rivaled their wedding in its emotional intensity. Patients Clara had treated, students William had taught, and friends who had become family gathered to wish them well while mourning their own loss. The cottage garden was carefully divided among those who promised to continue cultivating the medicinal plants Clara had established. Grace Morrison's farewell gift was a cutting from the original violet plant Clara had eaten on her first day in Willowbrook, now preserved in a small pot that would travel with them to their new home. "So you'll always remember where your real journey began," Grace explained through her tears. The territorial capital offered opportunities beyond anything Clara had imagined when she first stepped off the stagecoach as a rejected mail-order bride. The healing school she established became a model for similar programs throughout the West, While William's botanical research contributed to the growing understanding of native plant medicines, their marriage continued to flourish as their professional lives expanded, each success shared and celebrated together. The partnership that had begun in a small Oregon town grew to influence medical practice across the entire region, touching thousands of lives through the healers they trained and the research they conducted. Years later, when Clara's hair had silvered and her hands bore the marks of decades spent gathering herbs, she would still keep that small violet plant on her office windowsill. The descendants of the flowers that had marked her as different served as a daily reminder that our greatest gifts often come disguised as our strangest qualities. The mail-order bride who had been shunned for eating flowers had become one of the most respected healers in the Pacific Northwest, her love story with William legendary among the students who studied at their school. Their partnership proved that true love grows strongest when nurtured by mutual respect, shared purpose, and the courage to embrace what makes each person extraordinary. The sweet love promised in Clara's beginning had indeed triumphed, blooming into something that would flourish long after the original gardeners had passed from the scene. Like the perennial plants in Clara's first garden, their love had put down roots so deep and strong that it would continue growing for generations to come, inspiring others to trust in the transformative power of accepting themselves exactly as they were meant to be. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.